So I'd like to ask the question for anybody that's a participant that might not yet know what a DAO is. I'd like to ask Adam Miller, who's the co-founder over at MyDAO, because he's certainly spoken with hundreds of DAO projects, and I'd love for Adam to kind of give us his perspective and hear what the hundreds of DAO projects that he's speaking with are saying today. So Adam, can you just tell us what is your definition of a DAO?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll give you my definition of a DAO and also share what I'm hearing from these hundreds of DAOs and DAO founders and leaders that I'm talking to. So personally, if I distill, everything I've learned about DAOs, everything I've heard about DAOs, what I'm seeing with DAOs down to one technical definition, especially from a technology perspective, it's this top definition on the screen. An organization whose governing rules, membership tracking, and treasury management can take place on the blockchain in smart contracts and tokens rather than in written documents. So like a traditional company has bylaws, a DAO has smart contracts or some combination of the two. Now, you can imagine a case, and this has happened, for example, with Sushi DAO, where they do all this stuff on the tech side, but then they decide to hire a head chef, which is basically like a CEO. Some people in the DAO community would say, well, that's fine. It still has all their governance and membership tracking and treasury are on the blockchain, so it's a DAO. But other people are saying, well, no, if you hire a CEO, that's not a DAO anymore. So why would someone say that? Well, the other cultural element of what makes a DAO, to I'd say a majority of the people I talk to, is more about the organizational structure of the organization from a people perspective. So it's an organization that does not have centralized and hierarchical ownership, governance, and or management, right? So no top down, no management team, no officers, no CEO. And as a result, a whole set of other things flourish in their place, right? A long history of what's happened in the world of cooperatives and other types of organizations that are more distributed in how they're led and how they're managed. Right now, that's being explored in the world of DAOs, right? How can we run an organization with no one at the helm? So I think depending on who you talk to, you hear more one side or the other. Is it just about the blockchain part and the technology, or is it also about the way you organize the people?
And do you want to share a little bit more about why DAOs matter so much and how it's not only the future, it's now, and it's really going to, and it is revolutionizing the way not only that we work and collaborate, but just the way that people think and behave. And I think it just has such amazing potential, and I'm encouraged for the more DAO projects to get involved and on-ramped here. So yeah, you want to just share a little bit more about why DAOs matter?
Yeah, so first I'll share this first bullet point. So people who are building DAOs are doing two things, sometimes just one or the other, sometimes both. Some people are working on evolutionary use cases where we're taking things that we would have done a different way and doing them with DAOs instead, right? So you can think of almost like a combination of a democratic government with a company, where people have more voting rights and the power is more distributed. And people are starting anything from software projects, especially open source ones, to charitable organizations trying to save the rainforest, to video games, to local meetup groups, anything you can imagine that you might have started a traditional company or association or project before. Now people are doing it as a DAO instead. And that's awesome. And we'll see, a lot of benefits from that. There's also a revolutionary side of things, which is to say that DAOs are to organizations as crypto is to money. And what I mean by that is it's really about the censorship resistant, right? The fact that it's at least much harder for governments to stop you from sending Bitcoin. Arguably they can't, but maybe there's some nuance to it. The government can't stop you from sending Bitcoin to someone, but they can stop you from forming a corporation if they want to. Well, now anyone who can send Ethereum on the Ethereum blockchain can also form a DAO and organize with a group of people, manage money, get money donated to you, spend money as a group, and the government, again, more theoretically can't stop you. It's at least much harder for them to stop you. And so this could be really meaningful, right? If you think about a future where maybe governments are more authoritarian, even in, the Western world where we think of, the democracy is flourishing, we may need the ability to organize ourselves around common goals to be able to survive. The other interesting thing about DAOs and why they matter now is that if you go back just 1 or 2 years, almost all of the DAOs were related to a Web3 project, right? It was a crypto project, a token, a DeFi protocol, some other open source software project on the blockchain, and they govern themselves through a DAO. And that's really where the DAOs from the blockchain world came from. But now what we're seeing is people are starting DAOs to do anything you can imagine, right? Like I said before, it could be a meetup group, could be a city, could be saving the rainforest, could be a video game. And I've seen multiple examples of all of these things. And so people that have know nothing about Web3, except they've heard about DAOs, they're saying, well, instead of doing this project the traditional way, maybe I'll do it as a DAO. And that's really exciting. And that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. The final thing I want to share about why this matters is that if you think about the way Uber changed ride sharing, right? It's not like they took 25, 50, or 75% of the taxi market and just took that over. They made it so that people use ride sharing in way more situations than they used to before, right? Situations where you would never use a taxi, but now you will use an Uber, right? Like young people that don't even have a car because Uber makes it so easy to get ride sharing. Same thing with Amazon, right? At first, people said, well, maybe they'll capture 50% of the book selling market. Maybe they'll capture 50% of the retail market. Well, technically, I think they only captured 5 or 10% of retail, but is way more valuable than all the other retailers combined because they changed the way that we shop, right? And they changed the way that we even use technology online, especially if you're building technology. That's what's happening with DAOs. It's not just that you can look at, well, okay, we used to do it as a government. We used to do it as a corporation. We used to do it as a club, right? And now we're going to do it as a DAO. It's also that because we're making the infrastructure on which you can build organizations different and giving it new capabilities, we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years, people organizing themselves and their resources in ways that we can't even imagine today and that we never would have expected. And that's what's most exciting.
That really is. And that's such an excellent point too, Adam, because even when you talk about just the way that people are changing to organize themselves around a DAO from a decision-making standpoint, last year alone, I mean, your example it's spot on, right? We see different statistics everywhere, but last year alone, the holders in DAO interest was, I think it was 13,000. And it rose to 1.6 million. So just think about that. Any sort of interest in a DAO, whether it be a contributor, a founder, or I should say a contributor, initiator, and people that are participating and voting. I mean, that's a explosive growth. And so I'm excited to see what's going to come in 2023 and beyond. So in all the conversations that you have and talking with the hundreds of DAOs out there and probably all of the other panelists too, the one thing that I see is that this is kind of in general what the process looks like to start a DAO, right? You can search it up and you can kind of get a variation of this. And it all looks good until you get about to step 6, right? And so basically where a lot of DAOs, new and established, where a lot of them may get stuck is really kind of in steps 6 through 9. And so it's like the 80-20 rule, right? They can spend 80% of their time in the last 20% of this. And I think it's so key that people and DAO community members and projects know what they're getting into and really understand sort of the order of how some of these things happen is quite important. You might be asking yourself, why would a DAO even need to take on a legal form? And if you think about any project or business, right, they need to do these basic things. These are some good reasons why. They want to limit their liability. It's important that they have legal personality, and really what that means is they might want to get banking. They might want to contract with other stakeholders or third parties, and therefore they need to purchase tools for their DAO. So they may need to buy SaaS contracts with different software providers and things like that. And so because there isn't one owner or one person associated to the DAO, these are good reasons why they might need to take on legal form. And then, of course, the final one is really to optimize and pay for taxes appropriately. And so one of the big pushes behind this educational session was trying to understand why we don't have more lawyers yet in this space. And these are the early days, and we all know that. But for those that are maybe graduating or already involved in a legal career, whether it be a lawyer or some form of legal professional, it's important to know that there's opportunity to get involved. And what I did really was I just wanted to take a look at the DAO landscape and measure it against the legal landscape. And here's what we're showing is that if you look at deepdao.io, which is a source that many look to keep up with the number of stats of DAO projects that we have out there, it's estimated that there are approximately 80,000 DAO projects out there. And how did we arrive at that number? We really just extrapolated it, and we looked at, of the number of DAOs that are listed on deepdao.io, only 12 of them are representative there. So you can do the math there, and you can look at the 4,829 that are out there, and you can gross that up to 80,000. And even if we were to say a fraction of that is the real number, whether it's 40,000, 20,000, even 10,000, it's still a lot. And then we look at the legal landscape, and these sources really come from, you can see my sources at the bottom there. So I went to various bar associations around the world to look up the statistics of how many lawyers they have in various countries and how many legal professionals. So there's a significant number of lawyers out there, right? And I didn't favor any of these countries. I just put them up there because it's what we see a lot when we're in some of these forums or Discord servers. And so there's a ton of lawyers out there, right? But how many of them are involved in Web3? How many of them are Web3 legal professionals? It's looking like it's around 300 that are mixed between crypto, DeFi, Web3. It's fantastic that we have so many of you, but it's a really small number when you look at the number of DAO projects out there, right? So the current ratio of DAO projects to lawyers, the service level there is unsustainable. And so we want to help the participants and just the Web2 and Web3 communities at large understand who to go to for what, where to go, and then also how to get involved, right? Because not everybody really understands how they could get involved. And we can have another educational session on that. I want to ask the panel, really, why do you think there aren't more lawyers in this space? I'd like to ask Alexa and Nate.
The thing is that the industry is still novel, and the fact is that the regulatory framework is quite shallow to non-existent. And I would say that might play some role in the lack of legal professionals in the industry. But I did notice in the past, let's say 5-6 months, there was quite of an influx of legal professionals who are actually moving to the industry, learning about blockchain, crypto, NFTs, metaverse, DAOs, and trying to understand the environment a lot better. And I think that also IP, trademark, copyright lawyers are quite expanding into NFTs and understanding how to apply the existing traditional law to NFTs, because the same law still can be applied. And when it comes to like the higher number and to bigger adoption of the industry with the lawyers, it probably takes some time, but this industry is moving quite fast, and I think lawyers are moving quite fast as well. So it will probably catch up in next year sometime to have more experts in the space who could support the industry.
And what about you, Nate? What are some of your thoughts on maybe why there aren't more of you in this space yet? I know it's early days, but I think you have a really good perspective on this as well.
I think you're seeing more of an influx of attorneys who are interested or coming into the space, partially because the law applies in the same way, even though it is kind of a novel area that you're applying it to. Say it's DAOs, distributed ledger systems, things like that. And eventually attorneys are going to be presented with enough potential clients that are saying, hey, I work in this new space. You're going to have to come join me here. I think part of the issue is that the legal profession is inherently anachronistic. It takes a lot to move forward and take next steps for the profession as a whole, because attorneys they work in a niche area. They feel very comfortable there. They specialize there. They want to stay there. And, going to someone who's a contract attorney, corporate attorney for the last 20 years, top of their field in what they do, it's uncomfortable to move into that new space where the context is different and you have to learn the new context, a new way to speak, a new way to talk to clients. But again, I think as kind of the idea of DAOs, on-chain entities of various forms come about, more people are going to be interested in it. And as an attorney, you're just going to get more questions of, hey, I'm interested in this. Let me go ask these 3 different lawyers I know. Eventually, someone will be interested enough in wanting to move into that space. I think it takes you just have to have that inherent curiosity, right? You have to go do it, learn, get in the protocols, talk to the people, hang out in the Discord to feel comfortable there. And I think the legal profession will get dragged there one way or another, but it just is going to take more curious people to figure out, hey, the stuff I'm a patent or a trademark for a DAO isn't that different from a patent or a trademark or a startup, Web 2, whatever it may be.
Yeah, those are really great points. And I suppose also it doesn't really follow what has traditionally been the lawyer/partner path, right? So if somebody's on that track, they might be a little hesitant to step out of that lane and give this a try. So I do agree that there's a lot of curiosity, there's a lot of technical skill, and I'm certain that most lawyers probably have all of these skills and capabilities. It's just a matter of awareness and being informed. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So when we look at the unique needs of different DAOs out there, I'm going to cover a couple of questions with the panelists here. So I'm going to go to Eric, and also known as Rotorless, and ask him what types of legal entities are out there for a DAO to consider.
Like every good lawyer, I'm going to say it depends. It's not one size fits all. And so to a certain extent, it will depend on what your DAO wants to do and what decisions your DAO wants to make, and, what's under the hood. Is there a lot of people? Is there $1 million? Is it just, planting, flowers in your neighborhood? So that matters. And that will also influence the choice, because there's a lot of traditional choices. If it's not a very risky activity, it also depends, for example, if people want to be anonymous or if they don't mind not being anonymous, but they just want to use the technology. So what's out there? There's conventional, right? There's cooperative societies, associations, foundations. There's arrangements like trusts, which are not legal entities. There's company limited by guarantees, limited liability companies, unlimited liability companies. So there's a whole universe. And then there's some, what I'll call unconventional, newer products out there, which are mainly limited liability companies that are tailored towards DAOs, including the Marshall Islands DAO, and some of the state LLC laws that have been instituted in the United States. And then there's also, do you want to wrap the whole DAO? Do you want to wrap every single person in it? Or do you only want to wrap the multi-signature wallet if there's a treasury, and then only protect the people that send the instructions to the wallet? Or do you just want to wrap the individuals, right, and not the wallet? So there's a bunch of permutations out there, and a lot of it is going to be circumstantial based.
Eric, do you think that, for example, you mentioned multi-sigs, do you think that just everything that's gone on with, I won't name all of the acronyms that have been in the news lately, but with everything that's going on, people are asking questions like, am I liable? Like, am I civilly liable? Like, could I be involved in a civil case here because I'm a multi-sig in this DAO and, you know, it went sideways? Do you anticipate individuals that participate in DAOs or DAO initiators or are multi-sigs getting their own legal entity to protect themselves, sort of so that they can operate and jump around in various DAOs and contribute?
I think the answer is along the lines of, it is uncertain if you have no legal entity, what will happen to you and what you're exposed to. A lot of that depends where you live. So in one place, they might, because in that state, province, or corner of the world, they view somebody, for example, on a multi-sig has a fiduciary role of some type, or is actually some type of trustee. All of a sudden, you can have a whole bunch of legal factors apply to you that don't apply somewhere else. So that's the uncertainty part. What is certain is that if you have a legal wrapper, then you can make a lot of those uncertainties go away. There's no uncertainty that, I'll call it, the company, we'll call that for lack of a better word, right, is the one that's going to be bearing the brunt if you have some type of legal arrangement or legal entity in place. And so all these mysteries about, whether you live in Wyoming, you live in Toronto, or you live in Portugal, or you live in Australia, what happens to you when something goes wrong with the multi-sig and, somebody brings an action or a motion in a court of law, because that's where all the uncertainty lays.
And then I'm going to go to Alexa and ask just similarly here, like, how would a DAO project that's either starting out or already underway, how would they even know that they need a legal entity? And would they?
Well, I'm a big fan of having an entity that represents the DAO for a very simple reason. If you don't have a legal entity, you cannot enjoy legal protection, and the liabilities of those involved are unlimited, because DAOs are often confused for general partnerships. And as we know, general partnerships are business arrangement that involve two or more people that equally share profits, losses, and liabilities. So if any illicit activities are committed with the DAO assets, everyone involved are equally liable. And basically, one bad actor can put in jeopardy the whole community. And also, I hope you're past that myth that if you're in blockchain and in the DAO, you don't need to pay taxes. Of course, you have to, and the legal entity is there to limit liabilities in that sense as well. So it's good to have an entity, and I would definitely recommend it. And what I often hear is that having an entity is centralizing the project. That is not true, because what centralizes a project is the centralized type of operations and the governance, and the entity does not do that. So as mentioned, I think 2-3 times, I'm a big advocate for the legal entity, for everyone involved to enjoy the protection, and to make sure that you're on a good side of the law before things get a lot more complicated. And when regulations kick in, the regulators won't forget, and things can get a lot worse down the road.
So I'm going to jump over to our friend Sven now and ask some questions around what are some of the popular legal entities that you're seeing today that you can share with the group?
Well, so Eric already mentioned a few of the legal entities that exist for DAOs, but I would say that the most popular ones, I would say in the US, is the LLC. And if you go to Europe, it would be, for example, in Switzerland, it would be the association. And those are the two most popular entities that are being used for DAOs today. And the reason is those two entities are really flexible entities, and you can really tailor them to your DAO. And it's really easy to have different governance structures with those two types of entities. And that's also why that's also the reason why in Wyoming and Vermont and Tennessee, the legislator chose the LLC as the legal entity for DAOs. And I think, in Switzerland, we see a lot of association being used for DAOs, and it's pretty much the same reason. You can have for-profit associations, non-profit associations, and you can have a huge different kinds of governance structures, and those two entities will let you tailor your DAO to your needs.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Sven. And I'm going to go to my friend Law Panda, Nate, over here. How does someone know what is the best one for their DAO project?
I'm going to have to fall back to Eric's "it depends" answer. It's so incredibly variable. It's going to depend on where people are, what their goals are. But I think the thing to remember is what Sven was talking about, that the most important aspect is that the entity that you're registering basically is able to take inputs from a DAO structure, right? If you understand the DAO structure to be votes into a smart contract, which make a determination for a decision, the entity type, kind of like the Republic of Marshall Islands nonprofit LLC, recognizes that the decision-making output comes from that DAO contract, from those votes, right? A normal LLC doesn't quite have the ability to understand that, because you have voting from members who are holding functionally equity of an LLC aspect. The RMI LLC structure allows you to not, the DAO, each member of the DAO is not, a fractional percentage holder of the LLC and voting in the same way. So that's one of the most important things that you have to remember. So regardless of what the entity is, it has to understand that, the decisions are made by the DAO through the contract. The Republic of Marshall Islands LLC allows that. The Wyoming LLC recognizes that in the US. I forget if the Vermont one has specific language. Tennessee does. Other entity types like the Varen, the association, there's enough flexibility, as Sven said, that it still lets you use it for that purpose. But in that case, it's really every DAO member is a member of the association. Which is best? It really depends. Talk to a lawyer. There is no good way to really get to that answer. And there is no 100% correct answer. Bankless Legal Guild's working on a project that we're going to put out, kind of how Paradigm has done in the past, some other people in the space, where we're going to discuss some different entity types that might be useful for DAOs or even just startups in general. So that's one place to start to try to figure it out. At the end of the day, you really do want to talk to an attorney about, hey, what works where and how should we go about it? And it's unfortunate, there's just no cheat code around that.
Yeah. And you really bring to attention that there's a lot of, it requires the highly skilled legal engineering to lay all of this out and kind of, I'll just say, sort of play the chess game before the project gets kicked off, or if you have to sort of reverse engineer it. So there's a lot to think about there. I'm going to go over to Sven again here, because we talked a little bit about some of the legal questions that are influenced by the DAO. And Sven, I wanted to move over to you here to talk a little bit more about this. And I know that you're doing some research on this topic, and would love to hear more about that. And I'll just let anybody in the chat, if they would love to hear a more deep dive around regulation and whatnot, let us know, and we can bring Sven back and really dig into that. So Sven, I'm going to turn this over to you to just explain, beyond entities and talk about some of the legal questions that are influenced by the DAO.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think any DAO initiator or any person is pertaining in a project with a DAO has to face the question: should I have a legal entity for my DAO or not? and which legal entity I'm going to choose. And that's been the discussion until now. And all those decisions are going to impact a lot of different things. And here we have some of the main things that are going to impact you in your community, in your DAO, depending on your decision with the legal entity. And so I think the first point we have to think about, if you have a legal entity, it opens the door to having a legal personality for your DAO or for the community. And what does that allow you to do is, first of all, to legally enter into legal relationships. So, for example, the DAO could want to hire somebody to create some code, or DAO would like to enter into a contract with another entity. And the thing is, if the DAO is not a legal person, then the DAO cannot personally contract, and there's a bunch of legal questions then as to who is legally liable for the obligation of the DAO. If the DAO has to pay something, but the DAO is not a person, and a legal person, then who's liable for paying that amount of money? And it could be any person in the community of the DAO. That's not a good thing. And another thing to think about is the DAO, can it be sued? Can it sue or be sued? And it's important. For example, if the DAO gets hacked, or if there's a proposal that goes through and there's that is not legal, who can be sued for the actions of the DAO? And when you have a legal entity, legal wrapper, then that gives a target for either a third party or for the government to go after. And if you don't have this, then each and every member could be personally liable. And also having a legal personality lets you own property. So, for example, if you need office space, or there's DAOs out there that want to buy an island and have a new community. And to do that, you need to have legal personality, and an island cannot be owned by nothing, right?
Yeah,
And,
right.
and through, all those decisions also, I talked about that a lot. It's in the end, it's the liability of the members themselves. If you do not have any legal framework, there's a lot of chances that you're going to have joint and several liability for the whole community. And it's going to be a mess to understand which law applies to you, because you don't make a connection with the legal with the jurisdiction. So you could have members in Switzerland, you could have members in the US, in Portugal, in Australia, and for each and every one of those members, you could have the law being applied differently to them, and it's really going to be a difficult situation. So by having a legal entity, then you can limit the liability of all the members, and also know which regulations, which law apply to that entity.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all excellent points. And I personally, the few DAOs that I'm involved in, I know that there's a lot of personal use of credit cards and things like that, because a lot of these things are not yet established, or the chicken came before the egg type of thing, and it sort of puts you in a little bit of a loop. And so I'd be curious to hear in the chat if anybody else is facing that within the DAOs that they contribute to today, because that's a really excellent point. And it also begs the question of, if you are using your own credit card, just of the goodness of your heart, and it's not going to kill your budget, if something goes wrong, are you personally liable? So that's another topic for another day, but thanks for sharing that, Sven. And then just also, we put these up here just in closing on the US in terms of the DAO laws in Vermont and Wyoming that you were going to talk about. So I think you covered these. All right, thanks, Sven. So I'm going to move over to my friend Alexa to find out a little bit more of what's happening in Europe, and tell us a little bit more about the legal frameworks that are happening in Europe.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Europe still doesn't have a country that came up with a regulatory framework that supports DAOs, as DAOs like we have cases in the US. There are several countries in Europe that are popular when it comes to incorporating an entity that represents the DAO, and that is usually Switzerland, where the projects opt to incorporate a nonprofit foundation. Switzerland is generally quite friendly when it comes to crypto, and they were Switzerland was one of the first countries that actually came up with some laws around crypto assets, and they initiated the crypto valley. And so they're moving forward, but still did not get to the DAO framework. Another country that is popular when it comes to incorporating that entity is, for example, Liechtenstein, because it has good laws and low taxes. And when it comes to other countries, it really depends on the type of the project and what the project is doing and what are the long-term and short-term goals. So we usually have entities that are incorporated as LLCs or nonprofit foundations.
Okay, great. Well, that's interesting to know, and I'm keeping abreast of what's happening in Europe, and looking forward to hearing some developments similar to what's going on in North America about countries that are starting to recognize DAO. So we'll look forward to that and rely on you to stay updated on that front.
I mean, what's popular in Europe right now is MiCA framework, right? So that is definitely going to that's definitely going to change the landscape in Europe, and it will affect the market globally. And I also heard that they will start working soon on the next version of MiCA that will actually also include DAOs and how to understand DAOs as organizations. And even the current version already has implemented indirectly some limitations for when it comes to, for example, liquid governance. So that will be interesting to see how it will play out when it comes to entities that are incorporated in Europe. And also the UK published a DAO call a few days ago when they're asking the public to share their views and answer some questions when it comes to DAOs. So that means that there are definitely movements towards regulating DAOs, but nothing formal yet.
And so let's just talk about, we're kind of near the end here of our allotted time, but I'd like to ask each of the panelists of really what's most important and why, because when we covered and we heard everything that each of you have shared with us, it's fascinating, it's interesting, and then maybe it's a little overwhelming for some people that are thinking about this for their own DAO. So if we were to pick out like the key things, like for example, liability protection, I mean, Nate, what would you say is most important about that?
Probably, if forced to pick one instead of just saying it depends,
Yeah.
I would say liability protection, because that inherently goes to the legal personhood aspect, which then subsequently allows you to do things like banking, pay taxes, etc. And I think it's already been said, I think it was Sven, but look at it gives you a tax surface for a regulator, for a lawsuit, for whatever it is that is not the individuals involved. And, ultimately there could be a very disparate outcome depending on where people live. And that's outside of the DAO ethos entirely. You want people treated the same, and you don't want to have someone have a very negative outcome because they live in the United States, as opposed to Mexico, as opposed to Canada, as opposed to Switzerland, etc. So, limited liability through legal personhood really helps avoid all of those issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I suppose if you're a traditional business, you would set yourself up with a legal entity. So why wouldn't you in this case? So that's an excellent point. Thank you. I'm going to jump over to Eric Roderless and just what's most important about the banking and why. I know we kind of covered it a little bit about in terms of personhood and getting a bank account, but can you just share with us kind of a few sentences on why this is so important?
Yeah. So until like adoption is greater and you can do everything in crypto, which could be like 10 years from now, who knows? You have to interact with the meat space, right? At some point, you're going to have to pay for your Google Cloud platform, or pay for some type of service, buy a booth at ETH Denver or what, and you need banking, right? You need credit cards, you need banking if you're going to be operating some type of business like DAO that has some type of purpose like that. And there's a whole bunch of laws out there, they're everywhere around the world, around banking, and you can't change those. And so you and I or anybody on this panel can walk in personally to a bank. They can see you're a human being, you show your driver's license, and you've established a banking relationship. But an imaginary person, right, the fiction of a company, is already hard to get a bank account for a company, let alone for a DAO. It's impossible, actually, because before you can have a bank account, you have to have a banking relationship. And in order to have a banking relationship, somebody has to check out. And either the company has to check out, or I'll call it the legal wrapper has to check out, or if it's a arrangement like a trust, the trustees have to check out, right? Somebody has to be accountable in that business relationship before they'll even offer you a bank account. And the only way, or one of the only ways that I'm aware of, is to have a legal entity of some type.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so important, right? Because you really can't do much else beyond organizing yourselves on a Discord server without having that, right? So thank you for sharing, which brings us to the next point, really, is KYC, which is know your customer, or also known as doxing. I guess, Sven, I was going to go to you for this, and I know that Eric just sort of summed up why you need, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for when you initiate a project with a DAO or a crypto project in general, to really fully understand what banking laws or anti-money laundering laws apply to you. You need to really be careful about KYC, because as soon as you're involved with securities or futures, I mean, you are going to fall into those laws, and you have to know who you're dealing with. Another thing is for DAOs, it's going to be in the future more and more difficult to have an anonymous community. Governments are being more and more stringent on knowing who's part of a company. For example, there's the Corporate Transparency Act that is being revised in the U.S. Another example is in Switzerland. We banned bearer shares in 2019. So there's all this whole movement where governments really want to know when there's money involved, who's involved with the entity.
And then just Alexa, on DAO governance and timing, is there anything important that we should know there, and why?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish also like the governance and the operations of the DAO, and how to bridge the on-chain governance with the off-chain legal entity, because one shouldn't sabotage the other, to put it that way. So it's important that those two agree, and that the entity that is represented, the DAO, is a proper entity, and jurisdiction and the way how that entity is incorporated can support the project's vision and mission, and to also understand the on-chain governance. And the issue with having that entity incorporated is what happens with the DAO assets when you have that actual entity. So what matters is to have proper on-chain governance tools to make sure that the community assets still belong to the community, and in any case of any legal dispute or anything negative, that does remain the case.
I just want to turn it over to Adam Miller, who's has a podcast here for anybody starting DAOs. And Adam, you want to just share a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. Check us out. It's Just DAO It on any major podcast platform. It's the podcast for people starting DAOs. And maybe I should add for people helping other people start DAOs. I've had some of the guests on this panel on the podcast. I think eventually I'll hopefully have all of them. And that's really the goal of the show, is to share is both the recent news and what it means for DAOs, but also dig into what advice my guests have for people starting DAOs or contributing to DAOs today. So would love to have people check that out if they're interested.
With that, I want to thank everybody on the panel for sharing with us. Sharing is caring. And for the participants, we're gonna end the webinar piece of this here, or in panel discussion, and we're just gonna open it up for free form discussion. Sometimes this is called the after party in a more informal setting, or Nate, if you have any of your clients tuning in, and this is the meet and greet. So I'm gonna go to the questions. I also want to just mention here, so we can be free form here, ask away, but I wanted to let you know, first of all, that there's some new MyDAO merch out there that we will trying to come up with some trivia questions without without being too specific about one thing or another. So I'll just ask this. What year were DAOs legally recognized in the Marshall Islands? So this is for the participants.
Do they win it? Do they win the t-shirt if they get it right?
Yeah, sorry, Adam. Yes.
Oh,
so
win the t-shirt 2021. I expect a t-shirt that.
I saw Maria also answered even before Alexa said that.
Yeah.
So so we
She
should
typed
get
it. She got you.
Yep.
No, I was
I'm-
the first to say that loud. I want the t-shirt.
You're supposed to use your inside voice, Alexa.
We can get you a
all right.
t-shirt too.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, Adam, I don't know if you have more to spare, but
Sure. Yeah, Maria, make sure to reach out with your address and I'll send you one. I don't know if you can message me directly or just write me at adam@mydao.org and we'll get you a t-shirt.
Great, I will WhatsApp you.
And you too.
I'm very happy. Wow. Okay. And so for anybody that didn't catch that, the answer is D, it's 2021. And a lot of that is big thanks to our friend Adam Miller here for helping push that through. All right. The next question, this is not to win something. This is just my own personal, this is a very subjective answer, but I feel like my answer is right. So I'm going to ask, is anyone in the participant group going to Decentral or Art Basel Miami next week? And if you are, I want to ask you, who serves the best late night Cubano especial? Which cafe, which restaurant? One of them is a known institution in Miami, so you could probably just search this up and get it as the #1 answer.
I know I've been to a couple of them, but I don't know which one does the best.
Okay, all right. I don't want to put anyone on the spot there, but for anybody that's going, I can tell you Cafe Versailles is it. It's old. You can search it up. It's been around. It's it's like a legendary institution. So if you're going, you should at least go for a coffee or a Cubano. Highly recommend it. And they did not pay me to say that. And then you know what? I got a lot of these ideas from Maria at Weaver DAO, because she and the team at Weaver DAO are amazing at
Do I get the hoodie here?
happy hours and trivia. And so Maria, if you're still on there, I just want to say thank you, and Mide, thank you. So I spent some time in Greece this past summer, and I learned a lot of Greek language, which is a really cool language. And
I was the first, Daniel. Sorry.
Sorry?
She already answered, even though you haven't finished asking the question. Alexa already answered.
Yeah, Daniel said B.
I knew you would know.
I said it first.
What did you say?
B.
It's supposed to be for the participants.
Oh, I thought I was a participant.
It's okay. You definitely, Alexa, you will definitely get at least one, if not both of these.
Both.
Well,
Yes.
but we'll see. What were they right in saying B?
Yes.
Yes.
What was Zesty? How many people guessed that? A lot?
Daniel,
looks like Daniel. Yeah.
Wow.
So
nice.
Daniel, shoot me an email as well, or any of us, and get in touch with me. Or if you'll be at Decentral, I'll have these with me in Decentral and Art Basel.
That's if Alexa doesn't take the whole inventory.
Yeah.
Let's see what the next questions are.
We're gonna put Alexa on Jeopardy,
And what other merch is there? So
saving the best for last. So, all right. So thank you everyone for participating in that light little fun trivia there. I'm going to move to the chat questions now to answer them for anybody that has asked them and has patiently stayed on here. Lindsay asked about similar to tax breaks for people who donate to nonprofit DAOs. Yeah, you want to talk about, also wants to emphasize the question above about timing. How important is it to have that legal entity in place before the operation of the DAO? Yeah, you want to take that, Nate?
Yeah, so at least in the US, the operation of the tax break is through function of what the entity is. So if it's a 501c3, 501c4, so you actually need the entity, right? It has to be one of those types of entities for the donation to be, to be written off on your taxes. I don't know about other countries, but at least in the US, if you find one that's a 501c3, then that allows that kind of donation and tax write-off. One example I'll give is right now, some LexDAO attorneys are setting up a 501c3 for Lobby 3. And I think they may do a 501c3 and a 501c4, but Lobby 3 is an lobbying entity that works on crypto legislation. But so once their 501c3 is set up, then people can donate and take that tax write-off if they pay US taxes. I would love to hear if anyone has insight on foreign countries, how that operates.
Any other panelists want to add to that?
So if you live somewhere where there's lots of sales taxes, like the EU or Canada, what happens is the sales tax is what becomes your nightmare, not really the federal or state tax, because you can be operating a not-for-profit, not necessarily a charity, but it's a not-for-profit. And it doesn't matter that you have no taxes to pay because you're not for profit. You run into a lot of threshold issues, and it varies by country, right? 25,000, 40,000, 80,000. And so you need to think about that compliance. And in the countries where they collect VAT or HST and this type of sales tax are very aggressive. So this is usually their primary means of funding government. So unlike your income tax, where they might send you letters and hasteners, and it can wind along for a long time because you're a small fish. If you miss a single payment on something like sales tax, you may find all of a sudden that they're figuratively at your door.
Okay, Adam, you want to pick up any questions here, or anybody else on the panel?
I'll throw out one thing. This is a question that I think is really interesting about when you form your entity, whether it's like really early on or maybe later in the project. And I think the liability issue is pretty clear, that you want to have that liability shield as early as possible, like while you launch your token, while you raise money, if you raise money, right? Whatever the activities are, you want it as early as you can. Now, the non-US entities are generally somewhat expensive, so there's also a balance there of when you can afford it. But the thing that I think is more interesting, because it's more nuanced, is the tax implications of forming an entity once you've already been in business for some time. Because when you don't have an entity, let's say you raise money for your DAO and you raise $1 million worth of Ethereum. And then after that, let's say a year later, you create your legal entity, whether it's Marshall Islands or whatever. Right? At that moment, most tax institutions will treat that as a taxable event for the people involved, because those people are now giving those assets to the company, to the new LLC or whatever it is. And when you give away your ETH or spend it on anything, that's going to be a potential capital gains taxable event. So if that ETH has risen in value, all the people of the DAO will have to now pay taxes on it, versus if you on the gains, versus if you had created that entity and then raised the money. And let's say you're in a nonprofit entity, you'll never pay taxes on those. Well, depending on what country the entity's in, but like in the Marshall Islands, there's no capital gains taxes. You'll never pay for taxes on that capital gain. So that's a big one to watch out for.
Yeah, that's a really big one. Excellent. Thank you, Adam. And then James Sutton didn't really ask the question, but he commented, which is a really good point. He said different types of lawyers see Web3 differently. And I know all of the panelists are probably shaking your heads because you understand this, but James Sutton says he's seen securities, tax, and IP lawyers to be more forward-looking. And I don't know if James is still on to qualify what he means by that. And he said he's yet to find a lawyer who is Web3 DAO friendly.
I think
Other
you
than
need
this panel here.
a real estate lawyer, I think. Is what
Yeah,
he's
thank you,
talking
real
about.
estate lawyer.
I mean, I think the problem is in the United States, that type of law is pretty, property law is pretty antiquated. So if you're looking to do novel stuff with transferring titles and deeds and stuff, it's kind of hard to do just in general because it's based on old laws from different jurisdictions. I mean, I think Europe is kind of similar. There hasn't been a lot of novel changes to how titles are transferred, aside from like the MERS system which tracks titles after they're to allow securitization, basically, and to move around as an asset. But I would encourage anyone in here who's watching the webinar to reach out to me with questions about that type of stuff, and I can see if I can try to set you up with someone from LexDAO, LexPunk, or other firms that are associated with it, depending on where you are and what you need. I'm always happy to at least give it a try to try to find you something. Intervening, I will say, Adam, how's the for-profit DAO LLC legislation going? It's going to harass you about it every day.
Sure. So let's just do it in public. Why not? Yeah. So there's a new law that we've been collaborating with the Marshall Islands government on to create a for-profit LLC option in addition to the nonprofit that was passed last year. I'm expecting it to pass this week. It's been going through the legislative process. I think their parliament, they only have a week left in their term. Otherwise, it couldn't happen until January. So they're hoping to get it passed this week. There has been some discussion of whether there's going to be a delay that's put into it. So like pass it now, but it doesn't go into effect for some amount of time to prepare for whatever implications. Obviously, I'm not a fan of that, but it's going to ultimately be up to the lawmakers. So unfortunately, that's the latest piece of news, but I think we'll know this week.
Super exciting either way. And you and everyone at MyDAO should be proud of the work you're doing to get it in place. So excited to see what happens.
Thank you.
And I want to read off what I believe is the final question from Alon, and I will just summarize because it's similar to my question that I was asking the panel earlier on, is that if you're a multi-sig, or if one is a multi-sig, do they need to have their own legal protection, or should they form their own legal entity to protect themselves from a liability standpoint with their involvement in DAO? So I don't know if you want to, anyone wants to take that. I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think it's important for people to know, because we're trying to encourage more people and onboard more people into Web3 and into DAOs. And the last thing I want to do is really frighten people that, they need to have their own legal entities set up just to get involved, because that could potentially be a barrier to entry for many people. So do any of you want to grab that, or do you want to save that for a deeper dive?
I don't have a specific answer to that question. I think it's going to depend a lot on different cases. But if you look at the Uki DAO case, it's clear that the CFTC really said that if you have any power within the organization, you're going to be especially liable. So I think if you're multi-sig in a DAO, you're going to be a target if something goes south, right? So yeah, I would definitely try to make things legally stable before accepting such a responsibility.
Oh, see, that's very important advice. I'm glad I asked the question again, re-summarized it. Thank you, Sven. So we are at the top of the hour here. We have 3 minutes left. And so we just want to ask the panelists if there's anything else they would like to add. And And also, are you okay with me following up for Alexa? I didn't unfortunately have your social on here. So are you okay with me putting that on as I follow up with people so they know how to reach you?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Adam, anything else you want to add? Or I want to say thank you to Adam for collaborating on this and giving me the opportunity to host you all today and get into this really great discussion, because we brought up a lot of excellent points and interesting topics. And for some, the whole concept of a DAO is very controversial for people that maybe can't fathom how it could possibly operate and be successful. But we're going to host another session on that topic alone, and we will, folks can stay tuned on that, and we will be promoting these out. And we should also align with Adam's podcast to make sure that we're not covering the exact same bases. This was fun. It was great, informative, and we'll look forward to the next time.